The Kevin Durant trade is happening soon, and there's a lot of momentum towards him ending up in San Antonio, with a ton of reports linking KD and the Spurs as they try to continue to build a competitive team around Victor Wembanyama. And you might be wondering, why the Spurs? Why are they such a heavy favorite to land Durant right now? Well, first and foremost, it's really easy to put together multiple trade packages from San Antonio that make a lot of sense for Phoenix. They have a bunch of flexibility. They have a bunch of contracts that work. You can put together 4, 5, 6 different scenarios that all I think would be at least close to enough for the Suns to consider trading Kevin Durant. A really nice combination of picks, young players, contracts. It's just easy to find a KD to the Spurs trade. Not to mention the fact that Durant's preference at this point, by reports at least, seems to be the San Antonio Spurs. We've talked in the past about teams like Houston and Minnesota, but right now it seems like he wants to go play with Victor Wembanyama, just like De'Aaron Fox did at the trade deadline. And there's a lot of momentum, almost all the momentum, towards KD becoming a Spur. And the other part of this, of course, is the fact that the Spurs actually want him. I'm not convinced that there's other teams around the league that maybe are being mentioned as KD destinations. I'm not convinced that they actually are all that excited about adding Kevin Durant. That might be surprising considering the prestige that Kevin Durant's name brings, but at this point in his career, 37 years old, 1 year left on his deal, some of the injury issues that he's had, how bad Phoenix was last year, I don't think the trade market, I've talked about this in previous videos, I don't think the KD trade market was going to be as robust as maybe people would have expected it to be. And so the fact that he wants to go to San Antonio, reportedly, the Spurs want him, reportedly, and it's pretty easy to put together a trade, all leads towards KD and the Spurs being the most likely outcome at this point. Some of those other teams can certainly still make a push. I've seen Minnesota as kind of like a dark horse contender here. We've talked about trade packages for Minnesota and Kevin Durant in the past. And of course, Houston is a team that's been at the top of the list as well. But I think what's cooling that off is I don't think Houston's all that excited about adding Durant, a guy that doesn't really fit their timeline, a guy that maybe they don't see as a huge impact player on winning anymore at this point in his career. And they'd rather wait for Giannis or someone else, or just run it back next year with the same team rather than investing future assets in Durant. And this pivot towards San Antonio would make sense if that was the case, if Houston didn't really want Kevin Durant or didn't want to give up a ton in exchange, because first and foremost, the Suns would like to trade with Houston to get some of their picks back. If that's not a possibility, then they are now pivoting to the Spurs. It looks like this is going to be happening relatively soon, with the draft just about 2 weeks away, and certainly the draft is kind of the end point of this. I would expect Kevin Durant to get traded by at least the draft, if not earlier, and I can almost guarantee you that if Kevin Durant gets traded to the San Antonio Spurs, one of these next trades is going to be what the deal is going to look like. There's 3 different kind of levels of return for the Suns they can expect, and we're going to go through them from least to most return for the Suns. Level 1, the lowest amount I could actually expect the Suns to accept in exchange for Kevin Durant would be Harrison Barnes, Keldon Johnson. Essentially, those guys are just contracts. They're going to come up in these other trades as well. Plus, Jeremy Sohan in the 14th overall pick in the draft. That would give the Suns a pretty interesting complementary piece in Sohan to continue to develop. They'd get a late lottery pick in this draft as well, and they're not taking on any long-term salary in exchange for Durant. Maybe they can flip Barnes elsewhere. Maybe they can flip Keldon Johnson elsewhere. Maybe those guys can just help them next year around Devin Booker, being nice complementary players for them. And don't freak out, because like I said, this is the lowest level of value you can expect if you're a Suns fan, in my opinion. But if it really got bad enough that Houston just wasn't all that involved and Minnesota wasn't all that involved, maybe this is what San Antonio would actually be able to offer in exchange for Durant. I'd imagine that if this was the line that the Spurs drew, that the Suns would really go around and look and tell these other teams, tell Houston, tell Minnesota, hey, this is what our trade is in exchange for Durant from the Spurs. Like, if you guys can beat this, you can have him right now. But that's just level 1. Level 2 is probably where we're going to end up based off all these reports. I think this is the most likely Kevin Durant to the Spurs trade. It's Devin Vassell, it's Harrison Barnes as a contract, and the 14th pick in this draft. Vassell is the guy that I've talked about in previous videos that I would like to keep if I was the Spurs. I'd really like to try and push for a scenario in which you have KD, Fox, Steph Castle, Devin Vassell, and Victor Wembanyama. That group of 5 players I think would be really good, would push for 50 wins next year if everybody's healthy, and it's just a really interesting combination, and they need the spacing and the scoring that Devin Vassell provides. But I can understand the Suns being like, hey, we got to get something back here as a young player that isn't Jeremy Sohan. Like, this guy's still Kevin Durant. It's not like you're trading for a 45-year-old. Like, he's still really going to be able to help your team. We need a little bit more value, and so Vassell plus Barnes plus that late lottery pick makes a lot of sense for a couple of different reasons. It gives them that kind of core piece in Vassell that can pair alongside Devin Booker. I know people are going to say, oh, they're both shooting guards. I'm not really all that worried about positional flexibility here for the Suns. Those 2 guys can play together. They both can score and they can shoot. Like, I'm not worried about Devin Booker and Devin Vassell's kind of combination in the backcourt or semi-backcourt backcourt. I'm not worried about that. Then you get the 14th pick, and that I think is a pretty realistic return for both sides in exchange for Durant. And then the last level would be, I think, an overpay for San Antonio, and I'd be extremely surprised if it gets to this point for the Suns, but maybe this is just the level of aggression that the Spurs have in trying to get Durant. This would be the most that I would expect the Suns to be able to get in exchange for KD. Devin Vassell, Harrison Barnes, Jeremy Sohan, the 14th pick in the draft, and a future 2027 Atlanta first. Maybe it's protected, maybe it's unprotected, but that would be the construction. That, I think, is the maximum amount you can expect. If you are a Suns fan, you get Vassell, you get some future picks, you get Sohan to try and build around, and the Spurs are still looking at the situation saying they've got all their future picks, they've still got Fox, Castle, Durant, and Wembanyama. They've got a bunch of flexibility moving forward to be able to add to that. They signed KD to an extension, and that's their core. And that's the thing that really works about this if you're the Spurs, is you can continue to go up in value and in return for the Suns, and you still have a bunch of pieces, you still have a bunch of picks and plenty of opportunity to continue to build around Victor Wembanyama. If I had to guess, I would say that that second trade is the most likely outcome, but at this point we have a decent level of certainty of what the Durant trade is going to look like. We know almost for a fact, I would go so far as to say it's 100% certainty that the second overall pick in the draft is not getting traded in a Kevin Durant trade. Maybe something happens with Giannis and that completely changes things. Maybe that's why it hasn't happened yet, because the Spurs are waiting to see if Giannis becomes available and they'd rather get him than Durant. But the second overall pick is not going to end up in Phoenix as a result of a Kevin Durant trade, or at least I would be shocked. Like I said, I think it's an almost 100% certainty that that won't be involved. Now, if it was up to me, if I was in the position that the Spurs are in right now, I would really try and push for that first trade option. I would really like to keep Devin Vassell. I know that Spurs fans and people in general aren't super high on him. I still think he's really good. I think he's going to be a nice complementary piece for them. Had a weird year last year coming back from an injury at the beginning of the season. I think he's good. And if you can get that core group of 5 players, Vassell, Castle, Wembanyama, KD, and De'Aaron Fox, that group together is really cool. And if down the road you want to add somebody else, you have that contracted Devin Vassell rather than getting rid of all your contracts now. I really like that combination personally, but I would be willing to trade Vassell, Barnes, and a first in exchange for KD, although I wouldn't be all that excited about it because I'm just lower on what KD brings at this point. I understand the name value. I understand that he still had a really good scoring season last year, but there's only so many seasons in a row you can see of Durant not being all that happy in his situation, his team really not performing all that well, whether it be in the regular season or the postseason, him dealing with injury issues, him being 37 years old, him needing a contract extension that is going to be sizable, which is a massive part of this. I'm just a little bit more down, I think, on the overall value and the overall return that I would give up in exchange for Kevin Durant. But at the end of the day, it seems like it's going to be San Antonio. It seems like it's going to be one of these 3 deals, and I can't wait to see what it's going to look like if this is how it happens and we've got KD and Victor Wembanyama together in the front court. And it seems like right now this is going to be domino number 1 of a very exciting and a very interesting NBA offseason trade season.